Hey, everybody. Welcome to Impossible Live. Welcome back if you're joining us again. And no matter where you're joining us from, whether it's live or whether it's replay, thank you for joining us today. So, this one's for you. Besides a warm welcome, just a toast to celebrate whatever milestones you're celebrating, whatever good things, whether they're offers, whether it's some sort of good news, whether you're just tuning in from a place of gratitude, this one is for you. Today's session title is inspired by a song by Alicia Keys with a couple of featured artists. And besides diving into the conversations that we've been having about trust, one of the questions I'd really say one of the conversations I've been having with more people lately are about how do you replenish trust? And in this case, I picked the song Diary because one of the lines is about how secrets are safe with me. And the line says that your secrets are safe with me. And in some cases, when trust evaporates, when it's broken, whether we're hoping to repair it, something has happened that is, and sometimes unsaid. And if it is said, and if this act happens while others are around, there are a lot of witnesses, and the secret's no longer safe. So one of the things that I'd love to invite you to is, if we think of relationships as our opportunity to just share gifts with each other, to enrich each other, to help each other keep growing, that one of the things that can happen when trust seems to fade or to pause. Hey, Christy, how are you? Warm welcome, beautiful. And thank you for sending some of your Florida sunshine our way. It's 70 degrees here. Cannot believe it. It's temporary, but thank you for sending some to melt some of our snow. But I think in that process of having conversations with people who are talking about relationships, that something has happened. And in some cases, what happens to change the relationship, to change the trust dynamics, in some cases, it's unspoken. And in other cases, something verbal has happened, something serious has happened, and it's happened with a bunch of witnesses. And that is the hardest part, is that if in our perfect world, and I appreciate a conversation with Shawn Michael earlier about vulnerability and transparency. When we're vulnerable with the others, when our cards are all on the table, when something is broken, when something's not working, it's sometimes unspoken. And in those cases, when it's unspoken, the opportunity to replenish trust might still exist because something happened. And rather than immediately sharing the emotions that were bubbling up, some space is added. There's an opportunity for a little bit of distance, a little bit of reflection, a kind of, hopefully an opportunity to kind of dial in and, I'm not sure what happened here. I'm not sure why this happened. But I think what happens is sometimes people are focusing so much on what the AI would say on the process of building trust. And I'd love to share an invitation from an amazing coach who, during her workshop, she mentioned that she's really patient about establishing trust. Yvette Bethel, who I'm delighted to have received many of my trust certifications from, Yvette has a beautiful spiral of trust, and we can use it to measure our relationships. And in that spiral of trust, there's a trust sequence, and then there's a middle ground of kind of no trust. And then there's a distrust sequence. Replenishing trust is possible when we start from a perspective of no trust. It kind of means that the invisible scorecard, there isn't a lot on it. There aren't a lot of dings. There aren't a lot of dramatic things that have happened to kind of damage our relationship. The possibility exists, if not to repair, but really to replenish it, to kind of pour in and maybe have an opportunity in the future to kind of realign the relationship, or at least let it grow naturally. I think sometimes what happens is when things are happening that are public and things that are happening that are really involved in relationships with deep emotions in families, for example, or we can say in relationships that have run their course, that in some cases there's a staleness, but the emotions, they kind of linger in the air. And I don't, each case is different. And each conversation I've been having, hi, Christine, how are you? Warm welcome. I've been having a lot of conversations with people who are like, how do we fix this? Replenishing trust is only possible when both parties are interested in kind of coming to some sort of middle ground, to that no trust perspective, whether you're doing it privately, whether you're doing it with a mediator, whether you're doing it with someone else who maybe was a witness to whatever happened that kind of eroded the trust or damaged the trust. Hey, Jenny, how are you? Thank you so much for popping in. And one of the hardest parts about replenishing trust is it's only possible when both are willing. And if there are multiple people involved, it really can kind of get complicated. The thing that happens in terms of trust is if we all defined it the same way, and we don't. So if we started there in a relationship of what is trust, or in a relationship where we're trying to replenish trust, if we show up from the perspective, and Jenny and I are both in Angie Alexander's amazing Sage Leadership community, where replenishing trust would always be possible, because that's the inviting, wonderful, amazing space that Angie sets. It's a place where a conversation can happen publicly, a conversation can happen privately, a conversation can happen in a community, and it always levels up. So it always goes into that trust sequence that I'm talking about. And if you think of the trust sequence at the top of it as being deep connected trust, and as the very bottom of the distrust sequence of being intense distrust, as long as you're not deep in that distrust sequence, you might have an opportunity. And in some cases, the part about that line in Alicia Keys' song, sometimes when things happen, we're stuck in the past. We're stuck in how could this happen? And why did this happen? And in some cases, why did this happen to me? And if it's something that's happened publicly, there are so many moving parts to that puzzle that if you're at that point of trying to navigate in a relationship, I really encourage you, when you have a chance, to kind of reach out and let's chat privately. Because I started out, and I admit it freely now, I'm a trust pessimist. It's how I got certified in trust. Because having experiences with those who broke my trust, you have to recover when you're ready. And I had to learn for that. For me, it meant defining what trust meant. If you're in a relationship where you're trying to replenish trust, try to come to the table with your hope for that relationship, what that relationship could possibly look like in the future. If it's a leadership relationship, it's a little bit different. HR might be involved. Other departments might be involved. Other team members may be involved. It can really get complicated. But whenever you can, in terms of looking at trust, try and separate the pieces. And try and separate the pieces from the puzzle. Acknowledge that something happened emotionally to affect you. Acknowledge that something happened emotionally that can affect others. And besides defining how you feel about trust, Try and do some sort of check-in to see if it's a relationship that you're truly interested in repairing. Because we could only pour into that glass that isn't half full, or that glass that appears to have a lot of room, a lot of volume. And we can only do it when there's a willingness there. And one of the things that's challenging in relationships is if it's a workplace culture relationship, if it's a family relationship, if it's a conversation with someone about politics or really deep, deep beliefs, we've got some challenges there, some moving parts and some pieces that when we're interested, when we're ready to replenish trust, we have to come to the table with a little less of the baggage or the armor. And it's challenging because whatever happened to change that relationship, it happens between two people. When it happens publicly, it really can be challenging. There was a book years ago, and I keep meaning to locate the book, a book on verbal judo. It was a reminder that in a conversation, and I think it's been updated, but the book mentioned that in every conversation, there were a minimum of 3 people present. There's the you, full-time, aware. There's you, the person who's maybe thinking ahead to what you're saying that you'll respond to. There's the you maybe that's a little resistant to something that's happening. And in many cases, Verbal Judo, that book was really helpful to help me start exploring the energy that I brought to relationships. When we're bringing a different kind of energy, when other secrets aren't safe with us, there's a violation there. And when we hit something that really causes like a core wound, when we really, really, without intending to, in some cases, when we really cut someone accidentally, it doesn't mean that we're not caring. It doesn't mean that we weren't present. It may mean that we showed up that day and we weren't quite aware. And in that part of replenishing, sometimes there's no apology that we can share in the relationship. And sometimes there's no words that we can say that can erase the experience that the other person, that the other parties had on their end. It's something they observed. It's something they saw. It's something they witnessed. And it kind of hangs in the air. There's a line in an Ashford Simpson song about just seems to hang on. If you're in an environment where it seems like opportunities exist to replenish trust, try and breathe, try and really center yourself. And in some cases, whenever you can, try and invite someone who never agrees with you. And the reason why is you'll have someone else there who totally sees the situation from a different perspective. And in replenishing trust, we don't always see the other side. In some relationships, and I'll be really transparent, I have relationships now that are deep in that distrust sequence. It wasn't intentional. It wasn't a choice. In some cases, something happened that I didn't comment on at the time, that the person I was in a relationship with didn't comment on at the time. And neither one of us realized or acknowledged that something was broken. To replenish it, we have to be willing to fill. And part of that is the interest in being able to help someone else refuel, or in cases to heal. It really can take time, and it can take an exceptional amount of care. For someone like Jenny, who's deep in public community spaces with lots of people, lots of personalities, lots of styles, different genders, different generations, different cultures, different identities, replenishing trust in a room where something happened to break someone's trust. And in some cases, when something happens that violates someone's trust, that relationship's going to hang out in that distrust sequence for quite a while. And there's no one who acknowledges it. People don't come to the table and say, Here's what you did. We think about it in a new relationship or on a blind date, and how many of us have seen this or witnessed it. Someone will share what the person they were involved with before did. It's kind of like, here's the handbook of what you need to never do. And it's not always that transparent or that clear. But unless we're willing in the relationship to honor the secrets, to honor each other's vulnerability, to show up with respect, with privacy, with care, replenishing trust isn't always possible. And that's a hard thing to accept in relationships, maybe long term, relationships in which we're deeply invested, and especially when it's a cause that we really care about. You know, that person was just too excited for your meeting and you're so excited and you can't wait to meet them, and then someone doesn't show up. Or when they show up, they've got a different energy. We have a choice to acknowledge, human to human, there's something up. And sometimes that acknowledgement needs to be a silent one. When it's possible to replenish trust, a unique apology is needed. Sometimes not a public one at first, sometimes needs to be a private one. And in some cases, some kind of self check in to see if there's an opportunity for reconciliation. If you're showing up for the table or to the conversation, and if your intention is not, let's honor this, let's explore this, let's give each other space to really share and to show up in a way where we're remembering to just care for another person who's on the other side of the table or on the other side of the phone call. One of the challenges can be is these days it's really easy to send someone a text and they're not hearing your voice. They didn't catch your tone. They didn't know your intention. They didn't know where you are. They're not really sure of your meaning. And I think in replenished trust, there's an opportunity for clarity when we're willing. In some cases, people are just looking for the apology. And they need to just let that sit to really see whether they feel that the apology was sincere, whether it was well-intentioned, whether it was delivered with care. And in some cases, as in Jenny's organizations and workshops that she leads, there are so many different personalities and styles in the room. I think that part about writing in a diary, you assume that whatever you put in there is private. It's respected. No one else will read it unless you choose to share it. And that part of the relationship, there are some things that we are afraid to acknowledge, and we have to acknowledge that we have a fear of them. In some cases, when trust is affected, there's some sort of resistance there, and you can feel it before you put your hand on the door, before you dial the number to pick up a phone, before you open your email, before you go to a microphone to deliver a presentation. And I think there's that acknowledgement somewhere in there, just like we would with our diary, is to really ask for privacy and respect in the process of holding these conversations. If it's not possible, it might mean that you need to find another time. It might mean that you need to find another space. It might mean that you need more company. On the other hand, that opportunity for self-trust, for self-care, for self-respect, and to really think straight up, this is what I'm hoping happens in this situation. Hey, Leslie, warm welcome. I think one of the challenging things about replenished trust is sometimes it's not possible. It's a wish. Sometimes it's a calling. Someone has given you a charge. You need to fix this. You need to address this. We need to talk about this. And in those cases, having some ground rules for your interaction, really choosing a safe space to have the conversation with privacy. I, years ago, was in a work situation and my boss's wife came to the office, and she usually didn't come, you know, she didn't usually meet him in the office. And I had started out working with him in their home. And that day she came to the office, and then back then it was just he and I. And she said to me, Melanie, it's a good day for you to go home early. It's a good day for you to go and get on your train, wrap up whatever you're doing and just, and just take some space and leave early. I had no idea. So I cleaned up my desk. I went to the ladies' room. I came back to pick up my bag, and I noticed my boss's wife standing in his office. And there were no lights on. When I had left, the lights were on. So she was setting a stage. And I think that sometimes is what happens in a conversation, is to kind of set an intention, and when possible, to make sure it's a mutual intention. Set some sort of rules of engagement. Set up a safe space to have the conversation. And she came to the office knowing full well that I would be there. So when she started off, she wasn't alone. And I remember leaving that day and just like wishing her the best. I really could tell something was heavy on her mind. And it took me a little while to learn about the conversation. And she was there that day to tell him that she was leaving him. It was time for a divorce. And she had really set the stage. And I think that's part of the things in conversations where there's a bit of tension. Somehow, somewhere, we have to set the table as if we're setting a formal table to invite others to take a seat at, because their voices are welcome, because their energies are welcome. And this conversation about replenished trust, we're going to continue having it. We will also find that I've given master classes on rejuvenating trust. It is a dream. It is a wish. It is not always possible. And when it is possible to replenish trust, it's because it's happening in an environment where our voices are treasured, where our energies are treasured, where our emotions are respected, and in spaces where there is really, really great care. And without exceptional care and without grace and without respect, it almost doesn't have the space to bloom, as hopefully the flowers will shortly this spring, with all the snow and weather we've been having and all the crazy stuff happening. But in the conversations, whenever you have a chance in a conversation, create that sacred space. And if it isn't possible, try and choose another space. Ask for help creating it, ask for help hosting it, and try not to waylay someone. When we show up with those baggage, the bags full of emotions, full of anger, full of other things, it doesn't really set us up to replenish trust. But try in our AI fragile world to kind of really show up with the respect for others. And if you're trying to rebuild relationships, make sure you're both willing. Make sure you're both ready. Make sure you've allowed enough space and enough time. And show up ready to listen, not just to back up or share feedback about what went wrong, because it doesn't really give the relationship any room to grow. Treat it like it's your diary. Treat the other person like you're holding space for them to grow. And I'm looking forward to continuing these conversations. If you have a chance, join us as we celebrate 4 years of Impossible Live during our next live stream. But I wish you a very peaceful day filled with blessings, with opportunities and possibilities. Stay safe, stay well, stay inspired, and stay in touch. And really looking forward to a chance to continue these conversations with you. Take great care. Be well. And let's be careful out there.